The woman, with frozen tears on her face, holds her daughter's hand as the stepfather shouts merciless insults, but the elderly woman opens the rusty gate and emerges as the only hope on that cold night. The woman can barely breathe as her daughter starts coughing, and the relentless cold grips their bodies. The elderly woman, with mysterious eyes and a firm voice, simply says, "Come in, before it's too late." What happens next will completely change the course of this dark night.
New Year's Eve, which should have been filled with celebrations, served as a cruel reminder of everything that was missing in Selena's life. Yelling echoed through the small house in Buffalo. Her stepfather, with his face flushed with rage, pointed a finger at her, calling her ungrateful and useless. Her mother sat silently in the corner, her eyes lost and lacking the courage to intervene. Clara, only 6 years old, clung to Selena's legs, trying to understand why everyone seemed so furious. "You're only here because I let you," her stepfather shouted, "and you have the nerve to challenge me? I'm the only one who supports this household." Selena held Clara tightly, trying to remain calm while feeling panic rise within her. His words cut like knives, but the silent look from her mother hurt her the most. There was an emptiness in those eyes, as if she had given up long ago. "Enough," Selena said, her voice trembling. "I'm not going to listen to this anymore. I won't let you keep doing this in front of my daughter." Her stepfather stepped forward, but Selena was already moving. She grabbed a small backpack she had hastily prepared that afternoon and pulled Clara close to her. Without looking back, she burst through the front door and into the cold night. The biting wind hit her like a slap in the face. This was the harshest winter Buffalo had faced in years, with snow piled high along the sidewalks. Clara shivered, and Selena adjusted the girl's coat to better shield her from the cold. Fireworks exploded in the distance, heralding the approach of midnight. The joy resonating in the streets felt like an insult to what had just happened. Where are we going, Mommy?" Clara asked, her soft voice breaking the icy silence. "To a safe place," Selena replied, unsure of exactly where they were headed. All she knew was that they couldn't go back. Thoughts came in waves. She thought of her mother, who would be left alone with that violent man. She worried about Clara, whose health was already fragile, and how she would care for her daughter without money or a destination. But the sound of her stepfather's shout still echoed in her mind, reinforcing her conviction that she had made the only possible choice. As they walked, Clara began to cough. The soft, constant sound quickly turned into something more severe, and Selena stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, kneeling in front of her daughter. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to hide the panic in her voice. Clara nodded, but her face was pale, and the rosy cheeks from the cold were giving way to an alarming shade of blue. The weight of the decision to flee seemed to grow heavier with each step, and Selena began to question whether she had made a terrible mistake. With no other options, she decided to try asking for help. Walking along the deserted street, she began knocking on random doors, hoping that someone would be kind enough to open. Most houses remained silent, lights turned off, signaling that the residents were out celebrating or didn't want to be disturbed. At one door, a woman peered through a small opening, scrutinizing Selena and Clara with suspicion before shutting the door without a word. "Please, I just need a place for my daughter to rest a little," Selena pleaded, but the only response was the sound of the deadbolt being locked. Despair began to turn into tears, freezing on her face almost instantly. Clara leaned against her shoulder, her eyes half closed, as if she were about to fall asleep. Selena knew she couldn't allow that. Just when she was considering trying to find a public shelter, a risky option given her hasty escape, an outside door opened. An elderly woman, wrapped in a thick shawl, appeared in the doorway, observing Selena with curiosity. Her eyes seemed soft, yet there was something mysterious about her expression. "You're lost, dear?" the woman asked, her voice low and measured. Selena hesitated before responding. She had learned to distrust people, especially strangers, but Clara's condition left her no choice. "My daughter is sick. I need help. I just need a warm place, please." The woman tilted her head, as if evaluating every word Selena spoke. After a moment of silence, she pointed down the street. "There's a lady named Aurora who lives at the end of that street. She often helps people in difficult situations. Maybe she can assist you." Selena hurriedly thanked her, but the woman didn't respond. She just stood there, watching as Selena followed the indicated path. There was something strange about that encounter, but Selena didn't have time to question it. The only thing that mattered was reaching Aurora's house before the cold and Clara's fever worsened. As she walked toward the indicated street, fireworks finally exploded in all their intensity, lighting up the sky with vibrant colors. The contrast with the emotional weight of that night felt almost ironic. Clara began to murmur something, perhaps a request for water or a whimper of pain, but her words were too weak to be understood. Selena finally spotted a small house at the end of the street, with dim lights glowing and smoke rising from the chimney. Her heart raced, torn between hope and fear. This could be the help she desperately needed, or yet another door that would close in her face. As she approached, the feeling of being watched grew. Was it just the cold and fatigue, or was there something more on that night? Selena adjusted Clara in her arms and took the final steps, ready to knock on the door and face the unknown. The future was about to change in ways she could never imagine. The house at the end of the street seemed smaller with every step Selena took towards it, as if fear and exhaustion were warping her perception. The yellowish lights glowed softly through the worn curtains, and the smoke from the chimney was the only sign of life on that frigid night. Clara was groaning softly in her arms, and Selena knew she couldn't hesitate. There was no other choice. She climbed the snow-covered steps and knocked on the door with trembling fingers, the sound echoing in the silent street. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was the biting wind, which seemed to mock her situation. Then, the door creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly woman with a thick blanket draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were gentle, yet carried a mystery Selena couldn't decipher. "You must be Selena," the woman said, her voice low and welcoming. Selena stepped back slightly, her heart racing. How did she know her name? "Who are you?" Selena asked, her voice a mix of caution and fatigue. "Aurora," the woman replied with a faint smile. "Come in, you're freezing, and that girl needs warmth now." Selena hesitated, but Clara coughed in her arms, pushing her to step inside. The room was small but cozy. A fireplace crackled softly, and the smell of hot soup filled the air. There were simple furnishings, but what caught Selena's attention were the small wooden sculptures scattered around the room. Each seemed to tell a story: a mother cradling a baby, two children playing in a field, a family gathered around a table. Selena felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Put her on the sofa," Aurora said, pointing to a seat near the fireplace. "I'll get something warm for her." Selena obeyed, carefully settling Clara down. The girl looked pale, her small hands as cold as ice. Selena sat beside her, watching Aurora disappear into another room. There was no one else there, at least not that she could see. The house felt safe, but something about it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Aurora returned with a bowl of steaming soup and a thick blanket. "Here you go, dear," she said, handing the soup to Clara. The girl took the bowl with trembling hands, and Selena helped her sip the warm broth. Color began to return to Clara's cheeks, and Selena felt a small sense of relief. "Thank you," Selena said, looking at Aurora. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "No need," Aurora replied, sitting in a chair next to her. "I know what it's like to be lost in the cold, not knowing where to go." Selena furrowed her brow. "How did you know my name?" Aurora gave an enigmatic smile. "Just a guess," she said, looking away toward the fire. "And your daughter's name? Clara, right? It's a beautiful name." Selena felt her stomach churn. How could it be just a guess? Before she could ask more, Clara began to cough again, and Aurora quickly stood up. "This fever won't go away on its own," she said, heading to a nearby cabinet. "I have some home remedies that can help." Selena watched as Aurora worked calmly, bringing damp cloths and placing them on Clara's forehead. Each movement was meticulous, almost as if she had done it hundreds of times before. Selena felt a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Who was this woman? Why was she so willing to help? "Do you have someone waiting for you?" Aurora suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Selena hesitated. "No," she finally replied. "Just the two of us." Aurora looked at her as if she knew that wasn't the whole truth, but didn't press further. "Well, now you're here. You can rest a bit." For a moment, Selena considered leaving. Something within her insisted she should keep moving, not trust strangers. But when she looked at Clara, she saw that the girl finally seemed comfortable, her eyes closing as the fever began to subside. She couldn't risk taking her back out into the cold. Aurora stood up and went into the kitchen, leaving Selena alone with her thoughts. The firelight danced on the wooden sculptures, and Selena felt as if those small figures were watching her. There was something both comforting and unsettling about that house. Then the sound of a cell phone ringing broke the silence. Selena jumped and glanced at the backpack where she had stowed her old phone. She grabbed it quickly, her heart racing as she saw her mother's number on the display. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice low. "Selena?" Her mother's voice was filled with desperation. "Where are you? Please, you need to come back." "What happened?" Selena asked, feeling panic rise within her. "It's your stepfather," her mother said, her voice breaking into sobs. "He collapsed. He's in the hospital. The doctor said they need the insurance in your name to cover the expenses. If you don't sign..." Selena felt the world spin. "What? This can't be serious." "He's going to die, Selena," her mother continued. "Please, I know he did terrible things, but you can't leave him like this. I can't do this alone." Selena pressed the phone against her ear, tears burning her eyes. The man who had made her life hell was now depending on her to survive, and her mother, who had never defended herself against him, was pleading for her help. Guilt began to crush her. "I can't go back," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I can't expose Clara to that again." "Please, Selena," her mother insisted. "He's dying. You just need to sign. You don't have to stay." Selena hung up the phone without responding, unable to bear more. She put her cell back in the backpack and covered her face with her hands, trying to control the sobs that threatened to escape. She sensed Aurora's presence before she even heard her. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, her voice gentle. Selena looked up, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to do." Aurora sat beside her, her gaze understanding. "Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that reveal who we really are," she said. "But you don't have to decide now. Rest. Take care of your daughter. The rest can wait." Aurora's words were comforting, but Selena knew she didn't have much time. As she looked at Clara sleeping, she realized her decision would not only affect herself. She was caught between saving someone who had hurt her and protecting her daughter from the life she feared so much. The sound of the wind outside seemed to mock her indecision, and while the fire in the fireplace warmed the room, Selena felt the icy weight of her doubt growing, leaving her paralyzed between two equally terrifying paths. What would she do next? The answer felt as distant as dawn in the midst of that long, dark night.
Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and leaving a comment. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel, and it helps us bring you more heartfelt stories like this one. Let's continue the journey.
The next day dawned as cold as the night before, with the wind howling outside and the sunlight struggling to pierce through the heavy snow clouds. Inside Aurora's home, however, there was an unexpected warmth, not just from the crackling fireplace, but from the hospitality the elderly woman offered. Selena woke slowly, the fatigue and worry still weighing on her, but at least Clara seemed to be sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Aurora was in the kitchen, moving with an almost therapeutic calmness. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air. As Selena got up, she felt the lightness of the environment, but she knew she couldn't relax. The call from her mother still echoed in her mind, and the weight of her decisions remained intact. "Good morning, dear," Aurora said upon seeing her in the kitchen doorway. "You look a little more rested. How is Clara?" "Better," Selena replied with a shy smile. "The fever has gone down, thank you, for all of this." Aurora nodded, pouring a cup of coffee for her. "It's the least I can do. When we're mothers, we understand how far we need to go to protect our children." Selena held the cup with both hands, absorbing the warmth as she gazed out the window. The wind was blowing snow against the glass, and the landscape outside looked as inhospitable as her own life. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm protecting Clara or just running away," she murmured, more to herself than to Aurora. "We all have our reasons to run," Aurora said, her voice calm. "But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you are trying to find a way." Those words lingered in Selena's mind as the day unfolded. Aurora insisted that they rest, and Clara, though still a bit weak, played quietly with small objects in the living room, oblivious to the tension that hung in the air. During lunch, their conversations deepened. Perhaps it was the cozy atmosphere, or maybe Aurora's tranquil way of listening, but Selena found herself opening up. "My stepfather," Selena began, hesitating. "He's always been like this. He's always had this controlling way. My mother never did anything to stop it. She said it was just his way, that he was stressed about work, about bills, any excuse to justify what he did." Aurora remained silent, her eyes fixed on Selena, but without interrupting. The young woman continued, feeling the need to expose years of pain. "He would yell at me all the time, say I was useless, like my mother. And when Clara was born, it got worse. He said I had ruined my life and that I should be grateful he let us stay in the house." Aurora sighed deeply, her eyes seeming to wander into a distant past. "You're not the first woman I've known in this situation," she said finally, "and unfortunately, you won't be the last." There was a pause heavy with unsaid meanings. Selena felt there was something more, something Aurora wasn't sharing, but before she could ask, Clara called for her. The little girl was gazing at the small sculptures on the shelf, fascinated by the details. "Who made these, Aurora?" Clara asked with the innocence of a child. Aurora smiled, moving closer. "I did," she said, picking up a small sculpture of a mother holding a baby. "Each of these has a story. Some are memories of people I've known, others are just memories." Selena noticed a shared glance between Aurora and Clara. There was a silent understanding, as if Aurora saw something in her daughter that even she couldn't perceive. That moment of tranquility was interrupted by a knock at the door. Selena froze, fear spreading through her body. Aurora placed the sculpture back on the shelf and walked slowly to the door. When she opened it, she revealed a neighbor, a middle-aged woman with her hair tied back and an expression of curiosity that immediately made Selena uncomfortable. "Good morning, Aurora," the woman said, peering into the house. Her eyes quickly landed on Selena and Clara, and something in her expression changed. "Oh, you have visitors." "Yes," Aurora replied firmly, but keeping her tone friendly. "A young mother and her daughter needing a place to rest. Is there a problem, Agnes?" No, the neighbor replied, but her curiosity was evident. She looked again at Selena, squinting as if trying to remember something. "It's just, I think I've seen this girl before." Selena's heart raced. She knew that the story of her disappearance with Clara had already circulated through local media. If Agnes recognized her, the police could be called, and everything would fall apart. Aurora sensed the tension on Selena's face and intervened. "Well, Agnes, if you need anything, you know where to find me. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're busy." The neighbor hesitated, but finally took a step back. Of course, just take care," she said before walking away. Aurora closed the door and returned to the living room. Selena was still paralyzed, holding Clara closer. "Do you think she will?" Selena began, but Aurora raised her hand to silence her. "Don't worry," Aurora said with a calmness that felt almost supernatural. "I will take care of this. I won't let anything happen to you or Clara." Selena wanted to believe it, but fear was ingrained in her. Aurora, sensing her anxiety, said something that made her even more unsettled. I know what it's like to lose someone for not making the right decision. I don't want that to happen again." Selena looked at her, expecting more explanations, but Aurora simply began tending to the fire, as if the subject were closed. The afternoon passed slowly. Selena tried to distract herself by helping Aurora in the kitchen, but her mind kept drifting back to the idea that their location could be discovered. Clara, on the other hand, seemed comfortable, playing with the sculptures, and even laughing from time to time. That momentary joy was a reminder of what Selena feared losing the most. As evening approached, Selena made a decision. She couldn't stay there indefinitely. Aurora had been incredibly generous, but Clara needed stability, and her presence only put the elderly woman at risk. After Aurora stepped out to gather more firewood, Selena went to the living room, organizing the few belongings they had. It was then that something caught her attention. Among the sculptures on the shelf, there was a figure she hadn't noticed before, a woman holding a child. The woman's face, carved with stunning detail, looked disturbingly familiar. It looked like her. Selena carefully picked up the sculpture, examining it closely. The dress, the hair, even the way the child was cradled in the arms, everything seemed to mirror her own image with Clara. A chill ran down her spine. Why would Aurora have something like this? Before she could process what it meant, the front door creaked open, and Aurora stepped inside, bringing the cold of the night with her. Selena quickly placed the sculpture back in its spot, her heart racing, as she tried to act as if nothing had happened. But one question lingered in her mind. Who was Aurora really, and why did she seem to know so much about her? Aurora closed the door carefully, but Selena knew the elderly woman had noticed her troubled expression. The silence between them was palpable, as if both were carefully choosing their next words. Selena, still breathless from discovering the sculpture, averted her gaze and tried to focus on Clara, who was peacefully asleep on the couch. "Is everything okay?" Aurora asked, placing a bundle of firewood next to the fireplace. "Yes, it's just tiredness," Selena lied, adjusting the blanket over Clara. Aurora observed her for a moment, her wise gaze seeming to pierce through Selena's fragile defenses, but she didn't press further. Instead, she moved to the kitchen, beginning to prepare something in silence. The atmosphere inside the house was a mix of comfort and tension. Selena knew she had to trust Aurora to ensure Clara's safety, but the growing feeling that the old woman knew more than she let on made her mind whirl. And now, with the sculpture that seemed to represent them, the questions kept piling up. The next morning, the gentle warmth of the fireplace felt like the only thing keeping the relentless cold at bay. Clara woke up weaker, her skin warmed to Selena's touch. The fever had returned. "I think we need to take her to the hospital," Aurora said, breaking the breakfast silence. "I have a clinic in mind. They're good with urgent cases and they don't ask too many questions." Selena hesitated. The thought of leaving the safety of Aurora's house sent her into a panic. What if someone recognizes us? We've had issues with that before. Aurora placed a firm hand over hers. "Sometimes hiding is more dangerous than acting. Clara needs care now. Trust me." Reluctantly, Selena agreed. After wrapping Clara in several layers of clothing to protect her from the cold, Aurora led them to the street. The walk to the clinic was relatively short, but every step felt endless. Selena felt as if everyone was watching them, even though the street was nearly deserted. Upon entering the small clinic, Aurora immediately approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind look, directed them to a waiting room. Selena held Clara in her arms, the little girl's eyes half closed, as Aurora calmly spoke with a nurse. A few minutes later, a young nurse entered the room. She cast a quick glance at Selena and then stopped, as if recognizing her. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Selena felt the blood run cold in her veins. "Yes, why?" She tried to respond casually, but her voice trembled. "I'm sorry," the nurse said, visibly uncomfortable. "It's just that I saw something about you on TV, about a missing persons case with your daughter." Selena struggled to maintain her composure, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed in the room. Aurora, sensing the tension, quickly moved closer. "My granddaughter and great-granddaughter are here because of the girl's fever," she stated firmly, leaving no room for further questions. "If you can help, that would be great. If not, we'll look for another place." The nurse seemed taken aback by Aurora's authoritative tone and nodded. Of course, I'll get the doctor." Aurora turned to Selena. "Breathe deeply. This will pass." Selena wanted to believe it, but every second in the clinic felt like an eternity. Fortunately, the doctor was efficient, diagnosing Clara with a mild infection and prescribing medications that could be obtained right at the clinic. Aurora handled the entire process, and soon they were back on the street, the cold biting at their faces as they hurried back to the house. When Aurora's house finally came into view, a new scare awaited them. A police car was parked a few meters from the entrance, its engine running, while two officers chatted casually. Selena stopped abruptly, panic overtaking her. "It can't be a coincidence," Selena whispered. "They know I'm here. The neighbor must have called." Aurora looked at the police car, her eyes narrowing. "Stay here," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "I'll handle this." "What are you going to do?" Selena exclaimed, but Aurora was already walking toward the police car. Selena, with Clara still in her arms, ran to hide behind a nearby fence, her heart racing. She watched as Aurora approached the officers. Even from a distance, she could see the elderly woman's confident posture. They spoke for a few minutes, with Aurora gesturing occasionally. One of the officers pointed toward the house, but Aurora shook her head and smiled, as if explaining something trivial. After a while, the officers seemed to relax. One even laughed before returning to the car. They waved at Aurora and drove away, leaving Selena bewildered. Aurora returned to the house, calling for Selena on her way. "You can come out now, they're gone." Selena emerged from her hiding place, still holding Clara. "What did you tell them?" Aurora smiled enigmatically. "Just that I'm a lady who enjoys her privacy and doesn't appreciate unnecessary patrols in my neighborhood." "That was all?" Selena asked, suspicious. "It was enough," Aurora replied, opening the door and gesturing for them to enter. Selena was still in shock. Who was this woman who could deal with the police so easily? There was something about her that didn't make sense, and Selena could no longer ignore it. Later that night, as Clara slept soundly, Aurora sat by the fireplace, carving another piece of wood. Selena, sitting in the opposite chair, couldn't take her eyes off her. "You always seem to be in control," Selena finally said, breaking the silence. "But there's something you're not telling me. Who are you really?" Aurora didn't respond immediately. She continued to carve in silence before saying, with a tone more serious than usual, "No ghost disappears without being faced, Selena. I know that better than anyone." Selena waited for further explanations, but Aurora simply returned to her work, leaving the room in heavy silence. Her words echoed in Selena's mind like a veiled warning that her flight was about to come to an end. That night, while watching Clara sleep, Selena made her decision. She could no longer run away. Clara needed stability, and her mother needed help, even if it meant facing the man who had caused her so much pain. However, something within her also told her she needed answers before leaving. Aurora knew more than she was letting on, and Selena needed to understand what connected her to this mysterious woman. She decided she would leave at dawn, but not before confronting Aurora one last time. The following morning, her journey would take her back to the place she had fled from, but with new questions and a renewed determination to face the ghosts of her past. The dawn was still just a promise on the horizon when Selena quietly left Aurora's house. Clara, still sleepy, was wrapped in blankets as her mother carried her outside. Before closing the door, Selena left a simple note on the table by the fireplace. "Thank you for everything. You saved us." There was no way to adequately describe her gratitude, but that was the best she could manage at the moment. As she walked down the deserted street, Selena's mind oscillated between what she had left behind and what she was about to face. The snow piled up around her feet, and the wind cut against her face, but she forced herself to keep moving. Clara, though small, seemed to sense the seriousness of the situation and remained silent throughout the journey to the bus station. The trip was quiet and endless. Each mile brought her closer to the house where she had grown up, to the memories she struggled to forget, and to the ghosts Aurora had mentioned. Clara fell asleep in the seat next to her, and Selena, unable to rest, stared out at the monotonous landscape through the window. Her stomach was in knots, and her heart seemed to beat in time with the road. Upon arriving in the city, Selena felt as if an invisible weight had settled onto her shoulders. Her mother's house was exactly as she remembered, small, with peeling paint and windows fogged by the cold. The lights were on, and smoke billowed from the chimney, but that did nothing to lessen the oppressive aura she had always felt there. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. It took a few seconds for her mother to answer. When the door opened, Selena barely recognized the woman before her. She looked older, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and a weary expression. As soon as she saw Selena, her mother's eyes filled with tears. "You came back," her mother said, her voice breaking. "Oh, Selena, Selena remained silent for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and pity that threatened to overflow. Finally, she stepped inside, holding Clara's hand. The house was more disorganized than she remembered, with boxes and papers scattered across the living room. Her mother closed the door, hesitating before approaching. "I didn't know how to find you," she said, her voice trembling. "I was so worried." "Worried?" Selena replied with a bitter laugh. "You knew exactly what was happening to me. You always knew and never did anything to change it." Her mother looked away, gripping the door frame as if she needed support. I tried, but nothing," Selena interrupted. "You did nothing because you were afraid, and now you're calling me because he needs me, not because you care about me or Clara." Clara looked at her grandmother, confused, but remained silent. Selena's mother couldn't respond, only gestured for them to sit down. "He's in the hospital," she finally said. "The doctors said it's serious. They need you to authorize the insurance." Selena sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation crush her. "Where's the hospital?" she asked, resigned. At the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines monitoring heartbeats made her uneasy. Selena held Clara's hand as a doctor explained the situation. Her stepfather was unconscious, hooked up to machines, and the costs of treatment were beyond what the basic insurance covered. They needed her authorization to access the more comprehensive policy, which, as she discovered, had been registered in her name. "How is that possible?" Selena asked, incredulous. "I never authorized anything." The doctor looked at her with a mix of compassion and discomfort. "He registered your signature as the primary responsible party. Technically, it's legal, but not very ethical." Selena felt her blood boil. Even unconscious, that man still managed to manipulate her life. She looked at Clara, who seemed frightened by the whole situation, and then at her mother, who remained silent in the hallway, staring at the floor. "I'll sign," Selena finally said. "But not for him. I'm doing this because I don't want to carry that guilt any longer." After signing the papers, she left the hospital without looking back. In the parking lot, her emotions finally spilled over. She cried silently, trying not to scare Clara. When her mother caught up to her, she placed a hand on her shoulder, but Selena pulled away. "Did you know about this?" Selena asked, her voice filled with pain. "Did you know he was using my name? That he—" Her mother began to cry, the words coming out in sobs. I knew some things, but he said it was to protect us, that it was the only way to pay the bills. I was trapped, Selena. I always was." Selena felt a knot tighten in her throat. "And you never tried to leave? Never tried to get us out of this?" "I was afraid," her mother admitted, tears streaming down her face. "And I thought I had no choice, but you do. You do, Selena. Don't make the same mistakes I did." Her mother's words hit Selena like a blow. She wanted to hate her, blame her for everything. But in that moment, she saw the broken woman before her in a different light. It was someone who had also been a victim, who was also trying to survive in the only way she knew how. "You should leave, Selena," her mother said, wiping her tears. "I can't change the past, but you can." "I've already decided," Selena replied firmly. "I won't stay. I can't raise Clara in this environment, but I will help you from afar. I'll send money. I'll try to take care of you. But I can't stay." Her mother nodded as if she had expected that answer. They hugged for the first time in years, and for the first time, Selena felt that she could forgive even if she would not forget. As they left, Clara looked at her grandmother and asked with an innocent voice, "Are we coming back one day, Mommy?" Selena held her daughter's hand, feeling the weight of the question. "I don't know, Clara," she replied, "but I promise I will never leave you alone. Never." As they walked through the snow-covered street toward the bus station, Selena felt her heart heavy but determined. She knew she was doing what was right for Clara, but her daughter's words echoed in her mind. Could she really leave it all behind? Or was there still something that needed to be resolved? The monotonous sound of the train wheels on the tracks was almost hypnotic, a rhythm that matched Selena's thoughts. She gazed out the foggy window, her eyes fixed on the white landscape blurring by. Clara, sitting beside her, had fallen asleep, exhausted from the long journey and the emotions of the past few days. Selena adjusted the blanket over her daughter and turned her attention inward. There was a mix of relief and weight in her chest. She had done what was necessary, settled the insurance papers, helping her mother, and, in a way, closing a painful chapter of her life. But guilt lingered. Leaving her mother in that house alone made her feel cruel, as if she were making the same mistake as before, abandoning someone who needed her. Aurora's words came to mind like a whisper in her mind. No ghost disappears without being faced. Selena didn't know if she had confronted her ghosts or merely given them a new face. However, the thought of starting anew with Aurora and Clara gave her renewed hope. Aurora had become something she never knew she needed, an anchor, a guide. She couldn't wait to arrive to tell everything to the elderly woman and to plan a future together. "I will get a steady job," Selena whispered to herself, as if making a pact. Maybe at a bakery or a small local market. Anything that would bring stability for Clara and show Aurora that her help was not in vain. For the first time in a long time, she could envision a future that didn't seem impossible. When the train finally stopped at the small station near Aurora's neighborhood, the sky was beginning to darken. Selena gently woke Clara and stepped down with her. The cold was even more biting than before, but the sound of snow crunching underfoot and the soft glow of Christmas lights hanging through the streets brought a sense of familiarity that comforted her. As they walked toward Aurora's house, Selena felt a slight anxiety growing. Perhaps it was just the fatigue from the trip or the accumulation of recent events, but something felt out of place. When the small house came into view, with its modest facade and chimney that usually puffed smoke, Selena stopped. The fireplace wasn't lit, and the door was ajar. A shiver ran down her spine. "Stay here," she told Clara, pulling the girl behind her. "Let Mommy go in first." Selena slowly pushed the door open, the creak echoing through the silent room. The interior was dark, illuminated only by the faint light from a lamp in the hallway. The usual warmth had vanished, and the air was cold and still. The emptiness that had struck her outside intensified. "Aurora!" she called, her voice trembling. There was no answer. Selena took a few more steps inside and saw Aurora's silhouette sprawled on the floor of the living room near the unlit fireplace. For a moment she was paralyzed, shock taking all the air from her lungs. When she finally approached, kneeling beside the elderly woman, reality crashed over her like an avalanche. Aurora's face looked peaceful, but her skin was cold, lifeless. Selena held the old woman's hand, trying to find a pulse, but she already knew. It was too late. "No, no, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she shook her gently. "Aurora, please, no." Clara appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with wide eyes. "Mommy, what happened?" she asked, her small voice laced with fear. "Stay outside, Clara," Selena said, trying to keep her composure, but her voice faltered. She didn't want her daughter to see more than she already had. Selena's scream shattered the stillness of the night, a sound filled with pain and despair that seemed to resonate throughout the house. After a moment, she noticed something on the table next to the fireplace. A small wooden sculpture was carefully positioned there, as if intentionally left behind. It was a figure of a mother holding her daughter's hand. Beside the sculpture was a folded piece of paper. Selena picked up the note with trembling hands and opened it. To Clara, never forget who you are and where you came from. The words were simple, but carried a weight that Selena felt in every part of her being. Aurora knew. She knew her time was coming to an end and wanted to leave something for Clara, something to connect mother and daughter to her, even in her absence. The gesture was so typical of Aurora, silent yet full of meaning. As she held the sculpture and the note, Selena felt a mix of emotions: sadness, gratitude, and a deep pain that seemed endless. Aurora had been more than a mentor. She was the first person, aside from Clara, that Selena had truly trusted in a long time. And now, she was gone too. Selena ran outside into the street, calling for help. The lights in the neighboring houses began to turn on, and people started to emerge, drawn by the sound. An older man approached and asked what was happening. Selena, still sobbing, managed to explain in a few words. He immediately called the police while others gathered around, trying to understand what had occurred. When the officers arrived, they asked questions and examined the scene. One of the officers approached Selena, who was sitting on the porch with Clara in her arms, trying to soothe the little girl. "My condolences," he said gently. "It seems it was something natural, perhaps a heart attack, but we need to do an autopsy to confirm." Selena simply nodded, unable to find words. The night had turned into a nightmare she could never have predicted. All she wanted was to return to the safety of Aurora, and now that safety had vanished. The neighbors began to murmur among themselves, shocked by the news. Many seemed to hold Aurora in high regard, and the loss was felt by all. Selena, however, felt more alone than ever. With Clara tightly in her arms, she looked at the sculpture and the note again, as if seeking some sort of guidance in Aurora's words. What would she do now? Where would she go? Aurora had been her compass, her fortress. Without her, Selena felt adrift, struggling to find direction amid the storm.
Thank you for sticking with us. If this story has touched you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us and helps the channel grow. Now let's see what happens next.
The following day dawned as gray as Selena's heart. Aurora's small house, now empty and silent, seemed a reflection of her own soul, filled with absences and unanswered questions. She had spent the night restless, her eyes fixed on the ceiling while Clara slept beside her. The world felt as though it had lost one of its brightest lights, and the weight of that loss settled heavily on her shoulders. That morning, neighbors began to arrive with words of comfort and offers of help. An elderly man, whom Selena recognized as the owner of the local hardware store, brought a notebook filled with Aurora's notes. It was a kind of diary, but it also contained to-do lists and contact information. "She always wrote everything down here. Maybe you'll find something useful," he said, handing the notebook to Selena. With a tight heart, Selena took on the preparations for the funeral. No one appeared as a close relative of Aurora, which left her even more struck by the emptiness surrounding the life of a woman who had been so important to so many. The neighbors, however, showed profound respect for Aurora. Each seemed to have a story to tell about how the elderly woman had helped them through a difficult time. "She gave me shelter when I lost my home," said a middle-aged woman, her eyes glistening with tears. "I didn't even know her. I just knocked on her door one night, and without asking questions, she offered me warm soup and a bed." Another neighbor, a young man in simple clothing, shared his memory. "When my father got sick, it was Aurora who helped me take care of him. She taught me how to manage his medication and even secured some donations. I will never forget what she did." Each account reinforced the image of Aurora as someone who dedicated her life to helping others, even amid her own solitude. Selena listened in silence, her heart growing heavier. She wondered how someone could carry so much love for others while hiding her own pain so well. None of the neighbors knew much about Aurora's family, and everyone assumed she simply had no living relatives. As she organized the details of the funeral, Selena couldn't help but reflect on her own journey. She had arrived at that house with nothing, fleeing a past that felt crushing. Aurora, without asking for explanations, had offered not only shelter, but also a kind of strength that Selena had never known existed. Now, without Aurora, the void left behind was immense, and guilt felt overwhelming. "I left," Selena said to herself as she carefully folded the dress Aurora used to wear. If I had stayed, maybe she would still be here." That thought was like a constant thorn embedded in her mind. As the preparations for the funeral progressed, Selena's guilt mingled with gratitude. Aurora had saved her in so many ways, yet Selena hadn't been able to repay that debt. It was a debt she would never be able to pay. On the day of the funeral, the small local cemetery was covered with a thin layer of snow. The neighbors gathered in silence, forming a circle around the simple coffin that Selena had chosen with the help of the residents. Clara, holding her mother's hand, looked at the coffin with an expression of unusual sadness for her age. "She was the best person I ever knew," Selena said, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. "I don't know how I will continue without her, but I know she wouldn't want us to give up. Aurora believed that everyone deserves a chance to start over." The neighbors nodded, many of them crying as well. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, Clara held the note Aurora had left and placed it on the wooden lid. "Thank you, Grandma Aurora," she said quietly before stepping back and clinging to Selena's leg. After the burial, Selena felt more lost than ever. She sat in the empty living room of Aurora's house, surrounded by the wooden carvings that now seemed to tell a story she would never fully understand. Aurora's words echoed in her mind. No ghost disappears without being faced. But how to confront the ghost of absence? How to cope with the loss of someone who had become such a central figure in her life? "I don't know what to do, Aurora," Selena murmured, looking at the cold fireplace. "I wish I had stayed. I wish I had said goodbye." Clara, who had been playing silently with one of the carvings, came over and sat beside her mother. "Mommy," she said, holding the sculpture of mother and child, "I think Grandma Aurora wanted us to stay here." Selena looked at her daughter, surprised. "Why do you think that, my love?" "Because she left this for me," Clara replied, clutching the small sculpture, "and because she always said this place was safe." Her daughter's words were a balm to Selena's wounded heart. Perhaps Aurora had truly planned more than she could imagine. Perhaps that house, with all the warmth it had always offered, was the legacy Aurora wanted to leave behind. Later, one of the neighbors returned to the house with an envelope in hand. "Aurora asked me to deliver this if anything happened to her," he said, a solemn expression on his face. "It seems she thought of everything." Selena opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small bunch of keys and a note. "This house is for those who need to start over. Use it to create a home for you and for others who may need it. Aurora." Tears flowed freely down Selena's face. Aurora, even in her departure, continued to care for her and Clara. That simple yet meaningful gesture was the answer to all the questions that had tormented her. Aurora wanted them to stay, to transform that place into a symbol of hope and renewal. That night, as Clara slept safely in the room that had once belonged to Aurora, Selena sat in front of the fireplace and lit a fire. The flames danced, casting warm shadows across the room, and for the first time in days, she felt a thread of peace. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and financial hardships. But Aurora had shown her that starting over was possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. And in that moment, Selena decided she would make that house the home she had always wanted for Clara, and perhaps a refuge for others in need. As she watched the fire crackle, Selena held the sculpture of mother and child. "Thank you, Aurora," she whispered. "I promise I will honor what you started." The loss was still fresh, and grief would not disappear anytime soon. But for the first time, Selena felt that she could confront the ghosts of the past and build something new, something that would make Aurora proud. Selena's first days in Aurora's house were a whirlwind of emotions. Each room carried the essence of the elderly woman, from the intricately placed wooden sculptures to the subtle scent of herbs that seemed to emanate from every corner. As she tidied up the space, Selena felt like an intruder, yet she was beginning to call the place home. Clara, with her childlike energy, seemed to breathe life into the once silent house. The little girl ran through the hallways, chatted with the sculptures as if they were friends, and helped her mother organize the furniture with small tasks. "Is this going to be our house, Mommy?" Clara asked one morning while holding a cleaning cloth. Selena paused what she was doing and looked at her daughter. "Yes, my little one. We will take care of it just like Aurora did. This will be our place." That promise was the motivation Selena needed. Determined to create a stable environment for Clara, she began looking for a job nearby. It wasn't easy. With little formal experience and a history marked by struggles, her options were limited. However, at a small cafe and bakery in the town center, she found an opportunity. The owner, a middle-aged man named Greg, was patient and seemed to understand her limitations. "Are you willing to learn and work hard?" he asked, observing her with a raised eyebrow. "More than that," Selena replied firmly. "I need this chance." Greg hired her for part-time work, allowing her to take the mornings while Clara stayed with a generous neighbor named Martha. The woman, a retired person without children, offered to help with Clara as soon as she learned about Aurora's story. "Aurora was always there for me," Martha said, handing over a package of used clothes for Clara. "Helping you both is the least I can do." Selena was moved by the support from the community. People who had once been strangers now appeared with bags of food, clothes, or simply words of encouragement. The generosity surrounding her was a stark contrast to the loneliness she had felt for most of her life. Yet, despite the support, challenges were constant. One day, while sorting through Aurora's paperwork, Selena discovered that the legal documents for the house were incomplete. With no recognized direct heirs, there was a risk that the state would seize the property. This possibility filled Selena with dread. The thought of losing the place she was beginning to feel was a true home was almost unbearable. She spent hours on the phone trying to understand the process. Each call was frustrating, filled with legal jargon she didn't fully comprehend. The bureaucracy seemed like a maze with no exit. The lack of financial stability only heightened her anxiety. Selena knew that if she lost the house, she and Clara would be back to square one. "What if we can't stay here, Mommy?" Clara asked one night as they sat near the fireplace. Selena ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, trying to hide her own uncertainty. "We will stay, Clara, I promise." But keeping that promise felt increasingly difficult. As if that weren't enough, her mother called one hectic afternoon with news from the hospital. "His condition has worsened," she said, referring to Selena's stepfather. "They don't think he's going to make it." Selena listened in silence, unsure how to react. There was no sadness in her voice, but there was no joy either, just a void. "What do you want from me, Mom?" she finally asked. I don't know what to do," her mother replied, her voice heavy with fatigue. "If you could help, anything." Selena hung up the phone, feeling even more trapped between the past and the present. She knew she couldn't return to that toxic environment, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. Everything seemed to hang in a fragile balance, and at any moment, it could all come crashing down. That night, while Clara slept, someone knocked at the door. The sound was unexpected, slicing through the silence like a knife. Selena hesitated before answering, fearing it might be an official coming to discuss the situation with the house. But when she opened the door, she found an elderly man with a gentle expression. He wore a worn hat and held a briefcase in one hand. "Can I help you?" Selena asked, suspicious. "My name is Samuel," the man said. "I was a friend of Aurora. I came to bring something she asked me to deliver." Samuel entered and sat carefully, as if he were carrying the weight of many years. He opened the briefcase and pulled out some aged papers. Aurora was very private, but she was always clear about one thing. She wanted this house to be used to help people like you. Selena looked at the papers, which included a simple handwritten will. It wasn't an official document, but it clearly expressed Aurora's wish for the house to be a refuge for those in need. I don't know if this will be enough to sort everything out legally, Samuel admitted, but it shows her intentions. As she flipped through the pages, something caught Selena's attention. There were brief mentions of a distant family of Aurora, people she had never mentioned. "Did you know about this?" she asked, showing Samuel the notes. He shook his head. "Aurora never spoke of her family. I think she had a complicated relationship with them. Maybe you'll find some answers in these papers." Selena felt a growing curiosity. Who were these people? And why had Aurora never mentioned them? Despite the relief the papers brought, a new mystery seemed to have emerged. As she put the documents back in the briefcase, Selena knew she needed to learn more about Aurora's past. Perhaps understanding more about the elderly woman's life would also help her find a clearer path for the future. As she turned off the lights in the living room that night, Selena looked at the sculpture of a mother and daughter on the shelf. "We'll be okay," she murmured to herself. But somewhere inside her, there was a flicker of unease. Who were these people from Aurora's past, and why did they seem so important now? The wind blew softly as Selena adjusted the curtain at the living room window. The past few days had been intense, but the house was starting to come alive again. Clara was running around the yard with 2 kids from the neighborhood, laughing like Selena hadn't seen in a long time. The echoes of their laughter brought a breath of renewal to a space that had once been filled only with memory and longing. Selena felt grateful, even with the challenges still ahead. The neighbors seemed to have embraced the presence of mother and daughter. A woman named Linda, who lived on the corner, often brought over cakes or clothes that her own daughters had outgrown. The mornings at the bakery were becoming lighter, and Selena felt that she was finally building something stable. But the tranquility was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. When she opened it, Selena found her mother, haggard and with red eyes. Her presence was like a shadow from the past invading the present. Clara, who was nearby, ran to hug her grandmother, but Selena remained motionless. "Can I come in?" her mother asked hesitantly. Selena opened the door wider without saying a word. As Clara returned to play in the yard, the 2 women stood face to face, the weight of the past hanging between them. Selena's mother sat down, her trembling hands resting in her lap. "He's getting worse," she began, referring to Selena's stepfather. "The doctors say there's not much more they can do. He wants to see you, Selena. He wants to apologize." The silence that followed was deafening. Selena felt a mix of anger and sadness swell within her, but she kept her expression neutral. "And why should I care?" she asked, her voice heavy with bitterness. "Because he's dying," her mother replied, tears filling her eyes. "And because despite everything, we are family." "Family?" Selena laughed, incredulous. "What kind of family lets a child grow up afraid in her own home? You knew what he did, you knew how he treated me, and you never did anything." Her mother lowered her head, unable to defend herself. "I know I failed you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm here now. We can't change the past, but maybe we can find a way to move forward." Selena felt a pang of guilt as she looked at her mother's aged face. She wanted to scream, to accuse her of all the pain she carried, but she also knew that this battle would have no winners. "I don't know if I can, Mom," she finally said. "I don't know if I want to." Despite her resistance, Selena decided to go to the hospital. Part of her wanted to confront the man who had shaped so much of her pain, while another part feared the emotional impact this meeting would have. Clara insisted on accompanying her, saying she wanted to be there to hold her hand. Upon arriving at the hospital, the cold, sterile atmosphere made Selena feel even more uncomfortable. In the small room, her stepfather lay pale and connected to various machines. He looked smaller, almost fragile, a shadow of the authoritarian and cruel man she remembered. When his eyes opened and met hers, something shifted. The arrogance that had always accompanied him had vanished, replaced by a look of guilt and regret. "Selena," he murmured, his voice weak. I'm so sorry." Selena crossed her arms, standing by the door. "Sorry for what? For years of shouting? For the threats? For making me feel like I was never enough?" He closed his eyes, struggling to breathe. "For everything. I wasn't a good man, but I want you to know that I always loved you and your mother. even if I never showed it. Love? The word came out like a knife. Selena stepped closer, her heart racing. You don't know what love is. Love doesn't hurt, it doesn't destroy. Love protects, and you never did that. Selena's mother tried to intervene. Please, Selena, he's sorry. That must count for something. You're on his side? Selena turned to her mother, her eyes burning with anger. After everything, you still want me to forgive him? It's not about him, her mother replied, her voice choked. It's about you. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's so you can move forward. The argument escalated, the voices of the two women filling the small room. Clara, who had been sitting in a nearby chair, began to cry. Stop, she shouted, running to hold her grandmother's hand. Please, stop fighting! The child's plea brought immediate silence. Selena looked at her daughter, her heart aching. Clara was right. This cycle of pain and anger needed to end. On the way home, Selena reflected on everything that had happened. Her mother's tired face, her stepfather's weak words, and the fear in Clara's eyes. She realized that carrying so much hatred and resentment was not only hurting her, but also affecting her daughter. I don't know if I can fully forgive, she said to herself, but maybe it's time to try. When they arrived home, Clara went straight to the kitchen, drawing something with the markers a neighbor had given her. Selena remained in the living room looking at the sculptures of Aurora. The figure of mother and daughter seemed to shine in the fireplace light, a silent reminder that love should always prevail. Later, as she stepped out to get bread from the bakery, Selena passed a brightly lit sign that caught her attention. Free therapy, breaking cycles, building futures, the announcement in the clinic window read. She paused for a moment, reading the words several times. The idea of seeking professional help had never crossed her mind, but at that moment, it felt like the right decision. Perhaps it was time to face her ghosts in a deeper way, not just for herself, but also for Clara. Upon returning home, Selena hugged Clara tightly. We're going to be okay, she said, more to herself than to her daughter, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. But the road ahead still seemed uncertain, and her curiosity about what was to come made her hesitate. After all, breaking a cycle of pain was never easy, but it was necessary. The days passed with a tranquility that Selena had never imagined possible. Her routine, although simple, brought a refreshing comfort. Mornings began early with Clara getting ready for school, always full of energy. Afterward, Selena headed to work at the bakery, where Greg frequently praised her dedication. In the afternoons, while picking up Clara, there were always laughter and conversations about the day at school. At night, she would arrange little details in Aurora's house, adding personal touches that reflected her new life. Community therapy had become a point of balance for her. Selena learned to name the emotions that had once suffocated her. Anger, guilt, fear, each one was carefully worked through, and little by little, she felt the weight lift. Aurora, though absent, remained a constant presence. The sculpture of mother and daughter was always displayed prominently in the living room, reminding Selena of the legacy she needed to honor. On a sunny afternoon, the neighbors organized a small tribute to Aurora. The house was adorned with flowers, and Martha, the generous neighbor, read a poem in memory of the elderly woman. Donation boxes were set up in the yard, and the gesture moved Selena deeply. The community seemed determined to keep alive Aurora's mission of helping those in need. She wouldn't have wanted anything less, Linda said, placing her hand on Selena's shoulder. You're doing a great job. Selena smiled, but her gaze shifted to Clara, who was playing with other children in the yard. I'm trying, she replied. That night, Selena sat in the living room and read Aurora's note again. Never forget who you are and where you came from. These words gained more significance each day. Selena knew her mission was greater than just caring for Clara. Aurora's house needed to continue being a refuge, a place where other women could find safety and hope. The next morning, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was deep and filled with compassion. It was from the hospital. Selena's stepfather had passed away during the night. She fell silent, the news causing a wave of conflicting emotions. He was the man who had hurt her the most, but he was also part of her story. Selena, I'm devastated, her mother said on the phone. I don't know what to do. The weight of her mother's words made Selena hesitate. For years, she had wanted to sever all ties with that part of her life. But now, with her stepfather's death, she knew she had to decide. Going to see her mother would be an act of empathy, but it would also require facing feelings she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Clara sensed her mother's unease and, holding her hand, said, "Let's go with her, Mommy. You always tell me we need to be strong." With her heart heavy, Selena decided to go. They arrived at the hospital in the afternoon. Her mother was sitting in a chair in the corridor, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw Selena and Clara, she stood up and embraced them. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. They entered the room where her stepfather's body lay covered with a white sheet. Selena approached slowly, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Looking at him, she remembered moments of pain, but also small gestures that had nearly faded from memory. The day he brought a treat for Clara, a time he fixed something in the house without complaint. Tears came suddenly, and she didn't try to hold them back. It wasn't just crying for him, but for everything they had lost, for the words that were never spoken, for the mistakes that could never be corrected. Her mother hugged her from behind, also crying. "I'm so sorry, Selena," her mother said, her voice choked. "I should have done more for you, for us." Selena took a deep breath and replied, "I know, Mom, but now we have to move forward." As they left the hospital, Selena made a proposal to her mother. "Rent that house, use the money to support yourself. Come live with me and Clara. We don't need to carry this burden alone anymore." Her mother agreed, and for the first time, Selena felt they were moving toward a different future. Back at Aurora's house, a package awaited her on the living room table. It was from the elderly man who had brought the papers earlier. Inside was a small box and a letter. Selena opened the box and found formal documents transferring ownership of the house to her, with a clause stating that the property should be used as a community shelter. With trembling hands, she read the letter. Aurora's words were simple but filled with emotion. She revealed that she had lost her own daughter years ago, a victim of domestic violence. "I couldn't protect her," the letter said, "but I hope you can protect Clara, and may this house be a place where other women find the strength I didn't have." Selena closed her eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude and determination. Aurora had left behind more than just a house. She had left a purpose. By the end of the day, as the sun set, Selena, Clara, and her mother sat on the porch. Clara held the sculpture of mother and daughter, the golden light illuminating her face. "Are we going to be okay, Mommy?" Clara asked. Selena looked at her daughter and smiled. "Yes, my love, we're going to be okay." And as the first rays of the following morning lit up the house, Selena knew a new chapter was beginning. The pain of the past still existed, but now it was accompanied by hope. The cycle had been broken, and they were ready to build something new together.
The story of Selena, Clara, and Aurora reminds us that even in the face of the greatest adversities, there is always the possibility of rebuilding and hope. Selena learned that forgiveness, though difficult, is the key to breaking cycles of pain, and Aurora, with her final gesture, left a legacy that will inspire generations. This story is a powerful reminder that no matter how dark our days may seem, we can always find a new dawn when we choose courage, empathy, and resilience. And you? What past ghosts do you need to face to find your peace? What did you think of this journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow and motivates us to bring more stories like this one. And don't stop here. Click the final card on the screen to watch the next recommended video, an equally moving story that will surely touch your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the end.